All right, yo, everybody. We're on to another episode of the Mind Body Marathon. And this is going to be a great episode. And I'm your host, Dr. Leo Kormanik. This will be an episode on farm to table and kind of local sourcing food and some of the controversy associated with the industrialization of our food, which I think is a really important topic. Now, on the show to my left is Dr. Jared, and he was a farmer, right, growing up?
Yes.
Yeah. And then he's going to have some good insights. And then to my right is
like always
Zach. Zach LMT. And then on the show today is our friend here, Steve Parris. And Steve is a personal chef currently and has a lot of great insights into this whole industry we're in right now. So walk us through what you do right now for work.
I've been a private chef for the last 20 years, and I work with, just one client right now. I'm fortunate. And, they're very health-minded. They like to manage their wellness through diet and lifestyle.
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So you have a bit of a you told me in one of the first times I ever met you that you were a farm to table guy since the 90s.
Late 90s, early 2000s. Well, let's go to the late 90s. I was a chef. I was raised in restaurants since age 14. Always around food, always around very creative chefs. In 2000s, I started to work in a restaurant in Ohio City, Fulton Bar and Grill. Parker Bosley, who was a very popular chef and probably the Cleveland chef that started Farm to Table. He came in, asked me if I wanted to partake in a benefit dinner for North Union farmers markets, which are producer farmer markets, meaning you have to be the person that's selling you the food, grew the food.
Yeah.
So I had no clue what a farmer's market was. But, I went to the farmer's market, and it was the first time I'd have to say I tasted food. It was pretty revolutionary.
That's sweet.
I mean, I never tasted food that was like in the ground 2 days ago.
Yeah.
I wasn't raised with the garden, but as a chef at some very popular restaurants, you think you're getting fresh.
Right.
Fresh in a restaurant back then was maybe a week old.
Yeah.
I mean, the food system in the city, all the food comes into the food terminal around East 55th and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it ships out to the various stores, restaurants. There's no farm there.
Yeah.
And, back then, Parker said something amazing to me. He basically said, the earth and the farmer did the work. As a chef, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He said, just don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
And I realized that chefs have to be so creative because their food has no life.
Mm-hmm.
So and then I realized that being a true chef was about restraint.
Yeah.
And about respect, and not respect for the food, respect for the land. And as I grew to know these family farmers, respect for what they do. And then, of course, that led to learning about organic practices, Monsanto, and some of and even like the health department and the agencies that control these farmers that honestly, they had to struggle with just to produce wholesome food.
Yeah.
Because the industrial system is set up to, do what it does, which is not necessarily in our benefit.
Well, this is interesting. And, Martha Stewart, I remember reading an article with her, and she consistently kept saying that I'm not a good chef. I just have good ingredients. And it's just like, I love what you said there about if you don't have good sourced food, you do have to get more creative. Little bit different spices, throw a little bit more into it. But, when I was in Spain, in Valencia, they invented paella and sangria there. So they're awesome with food. And oh my gosh, having it like sourced from like a couple miles away from the farms, like the sangria was completely different than anything I'd ever tried. Like legitimately juicy fruits in there. And the paella, like you're looking at the Mediterranean Sea, and then that's where the shrimp came from and all that.
One of the chefs that was pretty famous when I was younger, I can't remember his name, Spanish chef, but he was the chef that kind of invented the whole foam craze that chefs do for a sauce, a foam.
Yeah.
Anyways, one of the most interesting stories he tells is that I think it was Anthony Bourdain that came to interview him for Time magazine or something at the time. I'm not sure. But anyways, they went walking through like a ghetto in Spain to get to the ocean side. And they sat down and they had a bowl of shrimp, like whole shrimp with the head and everything attached. And he tears the shrimp apart and they suck the juices out of the shrimp and they talk about how it tasted the ocean. And he's like, I'm trying to replicate this, but my customers will not. They're not coming here to eat a bowl of shrimp with the head on, but that's the experience he was trying to recreate.
Well, it's funny you say that because in the paella in Valencia, it's a whole shrimp, like the legs and everything is on it and everything. And what you do is it's like literally all on the bed of rice and you take the head and you smash it so the juice float. Yeah, exactly. And you just, you essentially eat the CNS, the central nervous system of this shrimp.
That's cool.
And that's, I mean, that's where sometimes the chef power comes in, is how do you take that simple thing, but create it in a restaurant that's going to, be an upper scale experience. And basically he was doing that. And I think that's how he created foam sauces, was basically with the innards of the shrimp.
Like with all the gastronomy and everything. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I love, so I'm here because I'm not a farmer. I had aunts and uncles that farmed and had a produce farm and everything like that. So I have a little bit of knowledge of like working with like vegetables at wash houses and whatnot. But I love watching documentaries on like high-end chefs that have gotten to a point of success and how they got there and their stories of it. And there's one in particular where it's a farm to table in New York City. And he talks about how he created a main dish and the main dish is a carrot, but he uses all the ingredients within the farm to express the carrot to be something that people would go like, wow, I can't believe I had that from a carrot. And it's like, if you do it right, if you practice responsibly, if you use what you have and use the resources, you can make anything the main dish. And that is like, it's so fascinating.
Well, one of the things that prompted this interest in this conversation is that whenever I travel to Brazil or Europe, people will say, "Oh yeah, we love your country. America's really cool, but we don't like the food. The food's really," and they always use the word industrialized. And that just makes more sense to the language changing there, but especially in Brazil, they'll always say that it's very industrialized. It's very processed. It tastes different than what we're used to. And so walk us through like, the farm to table concept and what that means with regards to like transporting the food and how the life cycle of the food and all that.
Well, in my experience, for me, it was very simple. Saturday mornings, I would go to the North Union Farmers Market as a chef, and I would shop. I had it was a very small restaurant, so it wasn't, it was maybe 100 seats at most, including the bar area. I would go talk to the farmers. I would ask them what they got, what's fresh, and I would just buy quantities of it for the week.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of that we came to realize is that, if you take away the quality of the food, you're getting a product that's more shelf stable because it's so fresh. So like the argument is it's expensive, it's more expensive, it's more expensive. But it also lasts longer and you don't have to like, what am I going to do with it? That doesn't happen.
Right.
So as you continue to shop, you start developing a relationship with the farmer, with their family. They invite you to the farm, and then you start sitting down with them and planning what you want for next year.
Yeah,
it's like, do you grow lemongrass? Do you grow ginger? Like, well, we used to. I'm like, well, I want it. Grow it. They would grow it, and then you'd introduce it to other chefs.
Huh.
But cool. The hardest thing is, restaurant business is very overwhelming, very time demanding.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough where the business was small, where I could get away and go and actually shop and develop the relationships. And I mean, that was the huge part of it, was getting to know these people.
Yeah.
And then they would ask you, what can I grow? What would you like?
Yeah. Let's switch directions. What did you and Jared, what did you and your family grow?
Yeah. So we had a produce farm. We would raise sweet corn in the midsummer, as well as blueberries and apples. And we would take our produce to the local farmers market in Worcester. So if you've ever been to the Worcester farmers market, we'd pick it by the truckload the night before, and then we'd transport it, and then we'd sell it by the dozen, half dozen. If someone wanted a large quantity, we could fulfill that order maybe like during the week. But sweet corn was what we did most the highest quantity. But blueberries was something that my mom kind of specialized in.
That seems different.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Ohio especially.
Yeah. And when I was a little kid, we had a small patch of blueberries, and there's a picture where I was just like constantly just like picking, and I was just stuffing my face full.
Yeah,
of
that's a smart kid right there.
That's awesome.
And so my mom, she's like, we got to have a blueberry patch, and so we got 240 blueberry bushes of different varieties, of course, and no spray. We would put like a peppermint based oil to keep the
Now, okay, so that's
Japanese-
amazing. So even back then, why did you guys choose not to spray?
Yeah.
And by spray, what do you mean?
So a repellent for insects, the Japanese beetles, very destructive to the blueberry bush, and they could come by and take away your entire crop within a week, and so you weren't able to pick it, you weren't able to sell it, and to kind of repel those insects, we wanted to do it as organically as possible without putting on a insecticide.
Yeah.
Obviously, trying to stay as healthy as we could.
But how did you know that was healthy? You know what I mean? Because that's kind of before this became a little bit more common
well,
knowledge,
Yeah.
which we'll delve into the Monsanto thing and glyphosate and all that.
Yeah.
But
I
I'm
mean,
just
in
curious.
my experience, I think the practices you were doing were handed down for generations.
There you go. Okay.
Which is what I was told. I was like, why do you do it this way? It's like, this is the way we've always done it. And I think, you think back, like, if my grandmother can't identify it as food, don't eat it.
Yeah.
And those practices they did back then fed everybody.
And what's really cool about that too is that I'm sure using insecticides and pesticides were probably sold in the fact of you can produce more quicker, faster. Right. But I think logical people realize like, no, this is not
Well, what's
okay.
interesting, if you Google, I did this last night, if you Google organic farming, because that's what we're really talking about, like pesticides in general is, inorganic. And like glyphosate specifically, which is, was made by Monsanto, it was initially patented as an antibiotic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's initially how it got patented. And I think that's still its main patent, even though it is considered, it's Roundup essentially, but it's an antibiotic.
Well, it works, I think, on the shikime pathway of a plant.
Exactly. 100%.
And that's how they could get away with it, is because it affects the plant.
Yeah.
So arguably it doesn't affect a human.
Correct.
But
the
big but.
Right. So, and that's tricky because that's exactly accurate.
And it's also not water soluble. So it stays in our environment. If I got that, I think it's not water soluble.
Correct. So it's a forever
chemical.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's used as crazy. But when it gets to the body, so let's just delve into that. When it gets into the body, it takes the place of glycine, which is one of the 20 amino acids. And glycine happens to be a very unique bended amino acid that provides a unique bend in a lot of enzymes and and collagen. It's really important for the bend in collagen, which is what makes up fascia and muscle. So glyphosate, which is Roundup, replaces glycine, but it has a little phosphate backbone to it, which then deactivates its ability to be able to hold its integrity in the enzyme and also within the collagen. So the collagen becomes weaker, it becomes more frail, the enzymes become less efficient, and then your body doesn't recognize some of these new metabolites or end products. So it's basically glycine and glyphosate or Roundup have the same receptor in the GI tract, and that's how it can get in.
Okay.
So ultimately, that's its destructive pathway. So yes, it is accurate. It does not specifically mess up the pathway within our bodies because we're not plants, obviously, but it takes the place of glycine. So it doesn't matter if it affects that pathway. It does something else.
It does, and then the fact that our sinus and intestinal wall are one cell thick.
Yeah.
The presence of the glyphosate leads to what is now coined as leaky gut and the
Yeah.
various symptoms and syndromes associated
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah,
So it's
that
very destructive to that lining, which is our body's protection from the external world.
right. I know I was talking with a girl, a lady who teaches in the Akron public schools, and she said in the kindergarten entry classes over the last couple of years, some schools have 1 in 5 are on the spectrum. And obviously we know allergies have gone through the roof and all that sort of stuff. It's like this is one of the main reasons.
I would agree. I heard a podcast with Dr. Zach Bush several years ago, who was on the forefront of researching glyphosate and its effects. And one of the questions posed to him was, well, if it's so dangerous, we would see this spike in something? He's
And we
like,
have.
and he's like, we did.
Yeah.
Here it is. When glyphosate was introduced to the chemical industrial agricultural system, within 2 years, those conditions
Yeah.
you were speaking of started to
So
spike.
people are trying to link it directly to like leukemia and bloodborne cancers, which is fine. And I think it's probably related to that. And that seems to be where all of the lawsuits come from with it. But in the end, it's like you saw autism rates go up. You definitely saw intestinal irritability come up, like dysbiosis, because one, if it's so not only, so we talked about the glycine and glyphosate, right? We talked about that pathway in the body. So it affects the way you're built. But the secondary thing is, the first thing I said was it's patented as an antibiotic. So you're essentially consuming all this like low grade antibiotic, which is going to wreck your gut bacteria.
And we've also established that it's not water soluble. It's staying in your body.
Yeah. So the point I was going to make is last night I was doing this, I was Googling, is organic farming good? And it's like everything that you can't find. It's all the articles now. Like I just screenshotted all this. Like organic farming requires more land to produce the same yield as conventional farming. That's a big conversation. They just keep saying it requires more land. And this is the other thing they say. Additionally, organic farms often need more water due to less efficient irrigation systems. So literally the only negative thing they talk about with organic farming is the increase in land and then the increase in irrigation issues with it.
It's propaganda to
Right.
sow fear.
That's what I'm saying. So like it doesn't even have anything to do with from the health perspective.
Yeah.
It's literally just all they're talking about is the green agenda.
Well, that, and now when organic farming became popular,
That's
say
interesting.
the early 2000s, industrial agricultural took note, and now they basically own the organic label. And they made it harder for the small family farmer to even afford an organic label. I mean, back, in the early 2000s, it was affordable for a family farmer to get certified organic.
Yeah.
I've talked to many family farmers over the years, and I'm not doing it. My customers know what I do. They know I have integrity. So they're not getting the certification, but they're continuing what they've done for generations.
And
I mean, you Google it, it's like literally constantly says increase land, has the same nutritional value, all this sort of stuff.
More
Well, that's the
water.
same argument, confined animal raising feedlot systems
Right.
use against, the grass-fed farmer.
Right.
And I think another thing is, it's the presentation of the product too. Like, if you're not using those chemicals,
Yeah, that's a good point.
A lot of people would complain if they had a worm in their ear of corn. It's like, well, just cut it off.
It's fine.
Literally
Yeah.
just
Well,
cut it off. There's
That was my first
yeah,
experience at the farmer's market was silver queen corn.
yeah.
And my son being fascinated, he was like 8, being fascinated. There's worms. He started going through, helping the farmer's daughter go through here's a cob to pull out the worms to have like a styrofoam cup of green worms. And then there was the corn fungus.
Right.
It's like, no, you want that.
Yeah.
Cut it off.
It's
I think people forget that food gets grown outside. and like it's a dirty job.
Well, yeah, a lot
That's a
of
good point.
a lot.
Well, okay, so that's the other thing. If you go through and just Google it, you'll literally find a bunch of blogs and a bunch of articles talking about how hydroponics are the new way to go and it's way safer and way better and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, I mean, you want the microbiota from the soil. Like you want that, all that conversation point.
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation
Yeah.
about soil health and
Yeah,
how,
exactly.
you know, the industrial food system is food grown in depleted soil. So your pound of zucchini isn't like a pound of zucchini from, you know, a family farm where
Yeah.
the soil is healthy and full of healthy bacteria.
Yeah.
There's a hydroponic system that I was talking to a patient with who lives out in Ashland and helps his mom run a farm. And I was talking to him about some of this, and he goes, "Oh, you guys might be able to clarify this for me. It's a hydroponic system, but it uses fish.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
basically, you feed these fish, they poop,
Yep.
and then it cycles through, and that's what makes the soil nutritious. And apparently,
It
he's like,
fertilizes the soil.
yeah. And he's like, if you live in a city, that's like one of the easiest ways to do it. And I was like, oh, that's
I
interesting.
don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like a
I forget
tilapia
what
farm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tilapia.
Yeah.
That much
Yeah.
tilapia in your
Well,
backyard.
yeah, and systems like that make great sense where it's inclement.
Yeah.
You know, where maybe the growing season is only a few months.
Correct.
That's a way to.
But that's the other thing
Around
too,
that.
because you know, if you are from the Midwest, which we all are, then you're eating. It used to be a party trick, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, to have like, you know, certain, you know, like an orange at your table in January or whatever. It used to be a party trick to do that because then you had to bring it in from somewhere because you couldn't technically grow it. And so, so eating cycles were different, right? So the Native Americans would have eaten, you know, squash and pumpkins and sort of those kind of fallish sort of things throughout the winter. And then during the summer, they changed to more your strawberries and blueberries and things like that. And there was a cycle to it all. But all of those provide different prebiotics and different nutrients for the body. And your body just sort of stores and reserves them as needed. So that when you get to different seasons, you can make it through okay.
Well, there's in the argument too that because the food then is seasonal, our bodies are challenged by different things at different points of the year.
Mhm.
And the food that's available to us is the food that the earth believes our body should have to be
Yeah.
resilient
I
at that
love
time of
that.
the year.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, like you're saying, like what you would normally eat through the fall and winter is better protecting you for the fall and winter.
It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, we're not eating, you know, I mean, I love organic blackberries now, but you know, it's not necessarily the best
Season for that.
Season. It's
Right,
not the
right.
season for that. So it's like, but
Yeah.
when you eat seasonal, I think, you know, it's hard in Cleveland.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I hope we get into this, but we're having such a proliferation of availability of small family farmers right now.
Right.
I mean, there's family farms that you can just go to their internet site and
Mhm.
a week.
Well, that's why I wanted Jared to be on here.
A week
Yeah.
later, you can have, you know, grass-fed beef and chicken from Knox County delivered to
Right.
your door.
Right.
Do you guys still have a farm?
We don't. We sold it when I
Yeah.
went off to college.
Because you
so-
were the labor and they couldn't handle it.
Wow. Yeah.
Here's the backbone.
Well, hey, I was talking to a famous coach in the state of Ohio, and he's for a high school coach, and he was talking about how, you know, he was down in Caldwell, kind of, you know, middle of the state of Ohio, and he was saying that, you know, over the last 10 to 15 years, his kids are not coming in anywhere near as strong as they used to be because they're not working on farms anymore. And because, like you're saying, they're kind of just getting sold off to the to become more conglomerate sort of farms instead of a small family sort of thing.
Well, that and to some degree, the offspring of the farmers are going off and doing
Right.
something
Well,
else
'cause
other than farm.
I'm sure you're not making a ton of money on it, right? Like it
No,
was more just
no.
the value of the land and
Yeah.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So the margins aren't great, I would imagine.
No, my parents were just doing it pretty much just as a hobby and for
Wow.
fun.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And
No.
I mean, that's beautiful, but it's also a shame.
It is. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, the foundation of life is the food we eat.
Yeah.
Yet
Can't make any money
you
off
can't
it.
make any money
Right.
off of it.
Hmm.
You know, and then you sell off to a bigger corporation, and as a whole, society loses out.
So you had mentioned to me before about some of the pressure that some of these farmers would get. Can you kind of talk about a little bit about that?
without naming names.
Yeah, perfect.
I mean, I remember having dinner with one of the family farmers, and to make a long story short, they pointed out the window and they said, "Do you see that?" And there's like a black SUV out there that you would see in an action movie
Yeah.
or whatnot. And I'm like,
Wick
I'm
film.
like, who is that? And they're like, that's Monsanto guys, because their organic farm was next to a Monsanto farm, and they were waiting. They were trying to catch the organic farm having seed from Monsanto there so that they could sue them.
Yeah.
Is basically the short of it. There's more detail to it, but basically they were trying to like eliminate the organic farmer
Right,
so that
right.
everybody would use their seed. And now that Monsanto and Bayer are sleeping in the same bed,
Yeah.
you have the seed producer producing non-nutritious food so that you would need a prescription to
Yeah.
make you better because the pharmaceutical company's in bed with the
Yeah.
agricultural company.
So Monsanto was a American company. And then they made different products and whatnot. And then they sold to Bayer, like you said, which is a German pharmaceutical company. And then, so essentially, what makes Roundup, what makes some of these pesticides, the company that makes it is also the company that supplies medication,
It's
essentially.
amazing.
Yeah.
Put
And
two
I
and two
mean,
together.
and they don't even hide it.
Right.
They
You
don't
know?
care.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe it's a problem with our society that people rather have a pill to solve their problems than change their lifestyle.
Well, this
And
is an important conversation because of the current or change in sort of the regime with the president and some of the changes that might come if RFK gets in and all that sort of stuff. And I think this topic is coming more to the forefront. I don't know how much it'll change things as a whole because there's a lot of money being flown around, Washington with this, with lobbyists and all that. But, in the end, at least people are becoming more and
Yes.
more aware of this.
the conversation's
Yeah.
more in the open forum now.
Yes.
And
And-
I think because of him, at least it's getting more airtime
Mhm.
and more people think about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't continue to solve our problems with denial and pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
our health problems. I mean, I had to fix my health problems through diet and lifestyle, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
That's the most important piece is, coming to terms with your overall change in life, and
Well, kind of going back to your chef days, if you take an orange and you put it in the fridge or the freezer and then you take it out after it freezes, it's not an orange anymore.
Well,
So what happens is the water, as it freezes, it forms a different shape, obviously, and that shape busts the walls of the cells that retain some of the water. And essentially what ends up happening with that is you've taken away some of the prebiotics of the orange, which a prebiotic, as opposed to probiotic, a probiotic is, a bunch of microbes that you'll take to sort of repopulate, healthy bacteria in your gut. A prebiotic is a very specific food that takes a while for your small intestine to break down. That's a very healthy experience with the good bacteria of your gut, and it's longer, dense chain carbohydrates. But if you freeze a vegetable or a fruit, you're rupturing those walls, and those bacteria can't break it down anymore because it's already broken down. It's already ruptured. It's a different product. That is the genius of the farm to table, because you're not having to really freeze anything. It's maintaining its vitality. And the other thing to consider is it has a higher density of water. It wasn't dehydrated. It wasn't like it didn't go through this contraction process with the freezing and then the unthawing.
well, even that, or the temperature changes during transport.
Yeah.
I mean, if food is packed in a 50-pound crate, which it is, it's not like in little individual containers. They just put it in big crates, big trucks, ship it off to whoever buys it. Its integrity is lost. When you're buying it from a farmer, it's a day, maybe 2 days old at the most. It's going to sit in your fridge for a week and be fine.
Yeah.
And its nutritional content's going to stay there. If you freeze it, that's a whole different process
Right.
because, the water expands,
Yeah.
and when it thaws, everything leaches out.
Okay, exactly. That's what I'm saying. You should try this with an orange or an apple, freeze it, and then you take it out and you eat it. It is not an
It's
apple.
mush.
It's mush. It tastes disgusting. or put in a banana in a fridge. Like everybody knows that it just like becomes very ripe and kind of a weird. Yeah. So we all get this. We all understand this process, but that's how food gets to us often.
It is. And it does take a lifestyle change to decide I'm going to go to the farmer's market. There's plenty of them around.
Yeah. Yeah. We're blessed in our area for that.
Yeah. I
'Cause
mean,
we have a national park and all that.
yeah, we're very fortunate. The issue now is, some of these farmers are putting up greenhouses, hoop houses, trying to extend their growing season. Finding quality meats is very easy nowadays. T Hill Farms does mail order delivery. New Creations Farm in Chardon has a storefront. Everybody's bitching about the price of eggs right now. You can just go there and get the highest quality egg you can, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg like it does in the stores.
Well, that's the thing.
That's if you can get them, because the people in the know,
yeah,
they're pre-ordering this stuff.
Just doing your research. I had this conversation with somebody about this topic of like, going to local small farms, and they said, it's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. And I said, literally, it's not. I go, I know at least like 3 farmers that I could go to right now. I go, you just have to get out.
There's CSAs and all that sort of stuff that make it more of an experience where you don't have to specifically go to the farm. They'll have drop-offs in different parts of the town, and that's the great thing, because they do it by season, right? So it's like, this is what we grow, and this is what we grow in the fall, this is what we grow in the spring, and so you just get what they grow.
Well, then there's other models like Bay Branch Farm does. They have a farm on the west side of Cleveland, and you basically open up an account with them. They shoot you out an email. Here's what we got. You tell them what you want. So it's kind of a play on a CSA, except you get to order specifically what you want.
Yeah.
And they even deliver on occasions, within a geographical range. Yeah. So that's, an amazing thing. And it's, where is it? 114th and Lorraine in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Who would think there'd be like a 2-acre farm or whatever back there?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That was the gentleman that you were telling me to get on the podcast.
Yeah. Eric.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely will. That's interesting. So, okay. Now walk us through, a lot of people will say when they travel to Italy, they can eat whatever they want, because they don't really have a lot of these practices in Italy. And one of the concepts there is that they don't have a Kansas in Italy. They don't have, a Nebraska where you can just basically have the whole state be a farm and just mass spray this kind of stuff. A lot of the farms are more rockier and kind of set apart by like just geographical constraints. And you can eat pizza there if you're like here, whereas you can't because glyphosate is at its highest content in that.
Well, let's take the glyphosate out of the picture.
Yeah.
It comes down to, and you could probably speak better to this, the actual variety of wheat we use for our mass-produced products. The wheat in Italy is some variety of a heritage-grown wheat that, once again, this family on that specific plot of land has probably been growing for years.
Yeah.
The wheat that we grow on the fields of Kansas in mass quantities is now designed to be compatible with the chemical agriculture.
Yeah.
And, once again, it's a variety of wheat, and I can't speak specifically to it, but that variety is grown because it works with the chemicals, not because it's good for our bodies. Or
what you mean is it's GMO'd.
It's GMO'd because, that's part of it. But I mean,
genetically modified.
Yeah. But you can go to a small family farmer and find a heritage wheat product.
Yeah.
What's
amazing is, some of these pesticides, they don't work specifically on things like E. coli.
No.
Very, very bad bacteria. And in fact, that's what GMO often means, is they splice in the portion of the DNA on E. coli into the plant so it can bypass the effect of glyphosate. That's what GMO really means. Genetically modified organism. They're taking the backbone of the DNA of an E. coli and they're splicing it into the plants. The plant can withhold the pesticide. So that's what it is.
Well, that's I mean, that's the plant is resistant to the pesticide is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. So then the weeds or whatever all around it isn't.
Right. The weeds die. The plant is resistant to it because it's been modified.
It's been modified
to withstand the pesticide.
That's what a GMO
and the
means.
weed killers. Exactly.
So that's called a Roundup Ready
Seed.
variety. Yeah, a seed. And you can literally spray weed killer on it. You know, you can spray your Roundup and it does nothing. It bounces off like it didn't even touch it. But it kills
Wow.
everything around it. So, you know, it
And-
preserves the
I mean, it's
plant.
genius how they figured that out.
Well, and not
know.
only that, when remarkable statement, it kills everything around it. Not only do the weeds go, the beneficial
Yeah.
insects go, the worms go, the soil goes.
Mhm.
And now,
Wow.
once again, you're having soil that is ripped of its nutritional value because of the chemicals. So, how do we solve that problem? We add more fertilizer. Where's the fertilizer come from? Confined animal containment system.
Okay.
What are those cows eating? They're not eating grass.
Yeah.
You know, I did a dinner with Howard Lyman. He told me Howard Lyman was the cattle farmer that went on Oprah and said, I'll never eat a burger again, and started this whole expose of exposing that industry.
Yeah.
Anyways, I did a couple dinners with him, and he's like, you know, if Hershey has a bunch of candy bars that they can't sell, they sell them to the animal feedlot system
Oh,
You're
Because-
eating Hershey bars?
because it's cheaper than feed. I mean, this is what I heard. I mean, hopefully I don't get like penalized for it, but these are the
gosh.
stories we've heard about like stuff that happens. You know, it's like
well, the point being is just like, it's not.
It's
you
not
know,
good.
It's not. Yeah.
It's just not good.
It's cheap. It's cheap. It obviously.
easy, yeah.
well, exactly. It's a business model.
Right.
It's a
You
business
know,
model. Exactly.
You know, if product A is cheaper than product B to feed to my cow, and the cow's going to get to a weight quicker
yeah.
because that's what it's about, driving the cow to a weight so that it can be driven off to slaughter. It's not about the health of the cow, the land, or
It's just about the production.
exactly.
So what about, okay, so this brings us into the realm of like, you know, the soybean world, the tofu world, the vegan eating world, and the obvious people abstaining from meat because of the cruel animal practices. But you mentioned some farms that are doing some good things.
Well, they like Tea Hill Farms. They raise their animals on grass. They have like these super large cages that are on wheels. They put the chickens in these large cages. They have plenty of room, put them on a plot of land. They move it around the next day so the chickens aren't feeding on the same plot. They have plenty of acreage to do this.
Yeah.
And that's the practice they've been doing.
I know if you come, my wife was telling me about this, how a lot of Brazilians, if they make a lot of money in the US, they'll often go back to Brazil and buy land. And then they just put a bunch of cows on the land and then just let it sit there. And then they basically, you know, just let them sort of live life. And then, you know, obviously they'll make money off the cows as well, but they just let them graze naturally and sort of, but that's their model essentially of having good, healthy sourced meat. And you know, you just don't really have that concept here because all the land is sort of parsed out in different ways. You got the mass buying of land by like Gates and some of these billionaires as well and things like that. That's kind of coming down the pike too, changing the dynamics of what's happening in our state.
I agree. And I mean that when they just start throwing the animals on it or whatnot, then, you know, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I don't eat a lot of meat, but when I do, I know where it comes from.
Yeah.
And to me, that's important. I personally thrive on a higher vegetable diet and beans,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, I'm not opposed to meat as long as it's grown the right way.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Did you guys have animals?
So we we raised chickens, and you know, it was more of a hobby for myself. I showed chickens at the fair, but the farm next to us had a big, large chicken house. So they set up a basically a warehouse, and it became a chicken hub essentially. And the smell
Mm.
is it just
Yeah.
permeated the valley. Like, you know, they're called free range chickens, but if you look at it, their only free range is about 1.5 square feet.
Oh my gosh.
And
Like,
that's how the label laws
Yeah.
have been
Yeah.
bastardized by industrial agriculture. You know, what does free range, natural, cage free. I mean, I don't know if any of them mean anything when you go to a supermarket.
Yeah. So what is a term that you should like use when you're trying to find eggs or meat?
At a supermarket,
Yeah.
I think you're just rolling the dice. You might as well just go buy some broccoli.
Yeah.
You know, go buy some organic broccoli. I think you'd be safer there. I mean,
Because it's basically not going to happen. You're not going to get good sourced meat.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
You know,
And I agree with that.
I mean,
but I was just curious.
we all have to. I mean, we're all, you know, have busy lives. We're going to end up at Heinen's and make the best choice we can. And they do offer some good choices. One of the benefits we haven't talked about, like if you do go to a farmer, family farmer, you have a relationship, whether it's chicken, beef, vegetables, is damn, that food tastes good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You don't have to, you boil it, roast it, salt it. You're
good to
done.
go.
Yeah.
I mean,
You know, and it's super enjoyable.
I mean, look at the egg color, you know, the egg
Yeah.
yolk colors. I mean, you get
Yep.
it from Walmart or a supermarket, and it's this milky yellow, pale, like, I don't know. It just looks sickly.
Well, to you, it doesn't look right. You're
Right,
like,
no.
what is this?
Well,
you know,
I grew up on orange eggs.
Yeah.
like that color.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the shoe color of.
and the shell was all unique colors.
yeah,
The chickens themselves are all different colors. I mean, I remember taking my daughter to what we called the blue hen lady. She always had these blue eggs, and you go into her hen house, which did not have that smell. And there was all these different chickens. And I think it was the blue fluffy chicken that would love to be held, which was crazy. Just jump in my daughter's arms and stay there. And it was just amazing, you know, and you just,
That's awesome.
and there's just eggs, take
Just-
an egg, you
yeah.
know, it's just,
Easter egg hunting.
yeah, it was
Well,
the neatest thing.
And to your point, it is a gamble because there's a company where, like, if I go to the grocery store and get eggs, there's times when I get the dark orange, and then there's times I'll get the same exact brand, and it's like that pale yellow, and you're like, ah,
Well, that's because like that label or brand does not use a farm. It uses a group of farms.
yeah, exactly.
So they get, you know, a bunch of farms contract with this label. They send them the eggs. So all those eggs are from, you don't know where.
Mhm.
When, you know, once again, you deal with a family farmer,
You don't got that.
you know where it's coming from.
So what do you suggest the average person do to make better choices about finding their food and
I mean-
sourcing their food?
I mean, the first step is to, research your area for local farmers markets. Here in Cleveland, we still have the North Union farmers markets going on during the winter. Selection is,
Where's that one?
there's one at Crocker Park and Shaker Square.
Yeah.
They're small. A lot of things could be canned or the value added goods. There's
Yeah.
still hard squashes. There are hydroponics going on. That's the first step, is to find your farmer's market. And you can almost find one any day of the week now,
That's awesome.
you know,
Hmm.
during the growing season, of course.
Yeah.
The more we do this, the more they're going to change and start producing you know, more during the expand the growing season.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like one of the first Monsanto documentaries I watched, David Simon, he said, you know, it's up to the consumer
Mhm.
to make these decisions. And, you know, hopefully industry will follow
Yeah.
with integrity. If that bothers you and you're really concerned about what you put in your body, then you go to a farmer's market
Yeah.
and look them out. And even now, like I said, you can have stuff shipped to your door. I just got an order of dried heritage beans from a farm in California. And everybody's like, dry beans, you got to soak them and then they make you fart and
Yeah.
all this stuff. I could cook these beans from a raw state in 2 to 2.5 hours and they are fine. And I am Mr. Gastric Distress.
Yeah.
You know,
And they don't make you fart.
no, these things are amazing. And and they get, you know, they got these wonderful names like
Thank God.
Calypso and Soldier. And
Heritage beans. I like that.
I mean, it's just amazing. And, you know, the vegans and vegetarians, you know, like, where do you get your protein? Well, heritage beans, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
I want to get on that train. I want to get some heritage beans.
So,
you know, oh my God, it's amazing.
okay. So then what about meats?
I generally deal for myself and my family with T Hill. That just seems to be the easiest. They have chicken, they have pork.
So say
They
if
have
somebody's
beef,
listening to this
lamb.
in another state, what would they do?
They could call T Hill Farm and have it shipped. They ship out once a week.
Bam.
UPS, it's so there in either 2-day or overnight. Everything's, I believe they still process everything on site. Flat, it's frozen, arrives to you frozen, packaged. You're good
Yeah.
to go. And I'm sure there's other farms that do the same. Have a similar business model. That's just the one that I
Yeah.
choose to deal with
What-
because of
what-
my relationship.
Do you know
with
much
them.
about Butcher Box? What do you think of them?
I do not.
Yeah, we use them, but I don't know. I'm just curious.
I'm a little skeptical of them.
I'm sure.
stopped.
That's why I asked, because
The
they've
only
gotten
reason
so
why I
big
say
now.
that, the only reason why I say that is because I got a shipment in, and this was during COVID, and I had a box come in, and I got like chicken, salmon, and I think some like ground beef, and the chicken was from Purdue Farms, but it was like Purdue Farms organic.
Yeah, no.
And I was like,
well, once again, I mean, I'm nothing against companies with that
Right.
business model, but what they're doing is, once again, they're contracting with various farms
Right.
for
Yeah.
product, and it might be a good thing because their demand is so high. Maybe they have to go somewhere else for
Yeah.
it, but hopefully that encourages them to seek out better sources.
Yeah. What about you?
I mean, have you ever heard of Fed from the Farm?
I have not.
So when I was in chiropractic school, that one of my roommates, he would always get a shipment every like first Saturday of the month, fed from the farm. It's I think it's an organic.
That's actually
trying
from
to
Missouri.
be quality. So that would make sense. I didn't know if they were in Ohio as well, but I think another thing to think about when you're looking for a quality source of meat is making sure it's grass fed. And like you were mentioning, how do you raise a sizable population of cattle on quality grass? And you don't see that very often, where you have a totally grass fed start to finish. There's always a grass fed and then corn finished, and then that changes the health of the animal, the fat
It does,
content.
and it's interesting because a couple of the farmers would tell me they primarily raise their cows on grass, but it would be at the end of the corn season, they would let the cows go through the corn pasture.
Yep.
And the natural process where they would eat the corn, defecate, create this fertilizer for the next growing season. It would put a little bit of fat on the cows, but it also facilitated the regenerative, you can't say the word.
Regenerative
There you
farming,
go.
yeah.
Nature of the farm. And also the whole thing about grass fed, one of the ways I believe industrial agriculture gets around it is that all cows are raised on grass for the first 2 weeks of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Technically,
That's interesting.
grass fed.
That's back to the label.
Back to the labeling laws. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not studying labeling laws. I kind of gave up on them at one point because once you know the farmer and the producer and you're like sitting
cares?
around, you're like, let's go to XYZ farm.
Yeah.
Call them up. Can we come down? Yeah, come on.
So you had another point?
I was going to say, technically, corn is a grass. It's just a very tall grass. So not that they would make that. I mean, if they say it's grass fed, they're fed on what you would think of as grass. But
Okay, so you're
corn
making the
is
point that
a
if you give
grass.
them corn feed,
yes,
that is technically grass fed.
technically by like
Well,
the
technically, yeah.
biological.
Well, it's,
Wow,
Yeah.
I
well,
didn't know
well,
that.
well,
That
it's
is
a whole different thing
That's
if you're like
interesting.
dumping the corn into a feed trough.
No, I get that. But
versus going through a corn field where it's
And
consuming
you're eating
the
But
sweet corn
yeah.
plus the fiber.
that's the way around it. Wow, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. So I have a family of 5. Life's crazy, busy. We get things shipped from Whole Foods, so we don't ever really ever go to the grocery store. What's some of the what are some other suggestions?
For where to source.
Yeah. Should people take the time to go, just spend an hour or two and just like lay out, just make connections with these companies online, or like
If
or-
that's all the time you have, then I would definitely start with like the North Union Farmers website.
Yeah.
They're going to have links to all these local farms, and then you can do the contact on yourself and
Yeah.
find out if that farm offers a different method of delivery.
So wherever you're living, just kind of look up your local market
Yeah.
or go to the market at least once and try to make those connections and then work your way back from that.
Yeah. I mean, I think once you go to a farmer's market, it's just going to be stunning. I
Yeah.
mean, once you actually taste food that was grown and then
Well, that's
learn,
what,
learn to make that time for it, because it is worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, I gave up Saturday runs sometimes just to go to the market.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's my biggest like gripe about where we're at in our society right now is we get all of our information obviously off of social media and we hear the doom and gloom. And it's like the best way to get knowledge is to talk face to face. And the more that I've gotten to talk to local farmers and also talk to my aunt and uncle more, it's a completely different story if the practices are done right. It's a completely different story. It's like almost like, oh, I never heard that before. It's like, yeah, and of course, I don't want you to hear that. And it's like, we got to get off of these media platforms that just give you just really toxic information
Yeah.
and actually talk to someone face to face and how they practice, what do they do, how do they farm, how is this stuff produced, and you get a better sense of how this works.
And
Yeah.
they are so willing to share.
They 100%
They
are.
want to share. They want to educate. They want to be there for us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, you ask the grocery guy, he's not going to know much.
Yeah.
You know, but you have that relationship, and then you like Spice Catering does these wonderful dinners right on farms.
I like
You know-
Spice Catering.
You know, they do these dinners. I hired Ben, you know, as my sous chef back in the day.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think he said something to the effect, he's like, damn, this is the first time I've had to see produce with dirt on it.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, because when you get most stuff in a restaurant, it's industrialized. It's
Well, that kind of
washed.
goes to the
Right.
presentation point
Yeah.
Jared was making.
Yeah, you got to wash. You know, we have to wash the dirt off the food.
Well, like a red delicious is not really an apple. Like that was just basically to like be a very specific look for a table setting. and
it
it's-
was meant to be a beautiful skin.
Yeah,
That's all it is.
I know it's not really an apple.
Look at the skin on that apple.
I guess I'll put
But
that one in the freezer.
You think in the 60s and 70s, you know, every single sitcom had a red delicious on every single table.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal skin on that apple.
Well, there are. I know I remember listening to a story on NPR about that and how they're essentially fabricated and for appearance,
Wow.
just GMO'd all the way to the point. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, any other points you feel like we need to hear about with this industry?
You know, there's a lot of them, but I think the biggest takeaway is to make, you know, we're on our phones way too much. You can
Mhm.
Google a farmer's market, find out what's going on. And like Zach said, talk face to face.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything in the Facebook feed. And get out there and have that human connection.
Yeah.
And then when you do eat that, you know, asparagus, somebody's, wow, this is really good. Where'd you get it? I got it from Monica's farm.
Yeah.
I got it from
That gives them more business.
Muddy Fork Farm. There's Snake Hill Farm in Bainbridge. Great meats, beautiful vegetables. I got this from Lou and Savory's farm.
That's cool.
You know, it's not, you know, once again, now your food comes with a story. And we all have memories of dinners. And now that memory has another person involved.
That's
The
awesome.
farmer, the person who grew the food, you are sharing with your family that you, your girlfriend, your wife, your other person took time
Yeah.
to create for somebody.
Even if you live in, you know, I remember I was reading the book North about Scott Jurek and his attempt to go south to north on the Appalachian Trail to break the record. And they were making the point when they were passing through New York, they were only, you know, a little bit outside the city, like at points on the trail, you could see the city. And the point they were making was how rural it gets just even right outside of New York. So if you drive for an hour outside of New York City, you can be on legitimate farms. So even if you live in LA, New York, Chicago, Houston, you have access to these farms.
They're out there.
They're out there.
Yeah.
And so like you can still be in a legitimate city and you can still have legitimate access to these farms. And, you know, so there's really no excuse.
I agree. I mean, even here in Ohio, Worcester's a wonderful farming community, and there's some lovely restaurants down there doing farm to table. There's, you know, Lake County has wonderful farms. That's where New Creations is. They have a farm stand that's open, I believe, 2 or 3 days a week, where you can just walk in there. It's like a store. It's a store,
Yeah.
except the food they grew or raised.
Can we get some of these on the show notes? Do you have show notes? Do you do show notes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'll put 'em on
some
there.
of these like local ones on here.
Yeah,
for
we could
people
do,
to-
and I mean, to dive into this topic further is when you'd have to talk to them. Bring Eric on from Bay Branch.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody who raises cattle.
I
You know, I think we were one of the first restaurants in Cleveland in the early 2000s to label our menu where our food was sourced from.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
love
wow.
that.
You know, it was like, you know, it was Spray Brothers Farms where we got our ribeyes. It was Nyman Ranch where the pork came from. We were one of the first restaurants to bring Nyman Ranch into the state of Ohio, which was, you know, Alice Water back in the day. That was one of the ranches she worked with to develop a source.
What about milk? You were talking about milk the other day.
Yeah. What are you guys' thoughts on raw milk? Where to get that?
You didn't hear this from me.
Change your voice for this one.
Yeah, I know. Right.
that.
I'm gonna blur you out.
Yeah, yeah.
Can we put the robot voice on for him?
Yeah. I think I remember Parker telling me it's easier to go get a bag of weed than it is to get raw milk in this state. I mean, Joe Salatin said something to the effect that we live in a society that Twinkies, Oreos, and McDonald's are considered normal, yet raw milk is dangerous. I don't, you know, I think you just got to, that's something you got to secretively do. And
Why is that?
I
guess I didn't realize. I guess I'm naive to
I think
this.
it's because, you know, raw milk technically has bacteria in it because it hasn't been pasteurized. If it is incorrectly handled, there could be some issues.
Yeah.
But the healing benefits of it, my understanding is just amazing.
Well, it's probiotics. It's got
exactly.
bacteria that
Yeah.
our GI tracts are used to having.
I agree. I mean, I personally don't do well on dairy and I avoid it.
Yeah, same.
But I mean, the way around it that we used to do was you would contact the farm and you would buy a portion of the cow.
Exactly.
So you'd have 10 people who own the cow. If you own the cow, you're allowed to have what that cow produces. So that's kind of the way you got around it. So you're not actually paying the farmer for the raw milk or yogurt or value-added product. What you're paying him for is room and board for the cow.
Yeah. Well, look at the logic of this. Okay, unpasteurized has bacteria in it. Why is the bacteria there? It's trying to feed off of the milk, correct? That's why it's there. Otherwise, it wouldn't survive. So it's there because it's trying to consume the milk itself. So then you eat it or you drink it. Now all of a sudden that bacteria gets into your system, and that bacteria does help you break down that milk because it's also trying to break down that milk. So the good, healthy sourced bacteria in your gut, the good strains, they're going to break down the milk for you. So like where people are struggling with dairy now, it's because they have a leaky gut or dysbiosis, and it's hard for them to break down milk regardless of how it's sourced because they just don't have a good healthy system.
And I'm kind of,
So
I'm in that boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And it's like and that's why in the 80s, in the 90s, and then it started to change kind of mid 90s, but that's why you could just have milk. And then now, like, you really can't in the same way. Like, you're going to kind of pay for it a little bit. I feel like almost everybody pays for it, but it's because of that. We just don't have the genus and the microbiota to adequately break it down.
Well, yes. And in the big picture, you talk about time. Say in the 90s, okay, so we're 35 years away from the 90s right now. That's 35 years we've consumed of glyphosate.
Yeah.
Because it's in everything now. It's in our rainwater. We can't run away from it, even if we do an organic diet. So we have these challenges.
And that's one of the, when you Google it, that's one of the other arguments is that it's even organic farms still have it. It's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
well, duh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to get away from it. And because we are individual creatures of a certain chemistry and electromagnetic energy.
Yeah.
We respond differently to different foods. And I mean, I was a C-section baby, so I never went through the vaginal canal and had the gut flora.
The properly inoculation.
Exactly. So, you know, my gut has been a struggle and a learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, you know, for the first 45 years of my life, my diet was what it was,
Yeah.
especially when we get into college.
Yeah.
And even being in a restaurant when I thought I was doing everything right, I didn't realize, where that food came from.
Right. Yeah, I know. We were talking about, we're talking to Clayton about this when he was on the podcast, and how he can race well in Europe and Asia because he can basically eat whatever he wants.
Yeah.
But he grew up on a farm, and he created a broad spectrum of, healthy bacteria in his body. So that way he can be a little bit more lenient with his diet later. But such as Stevie, like you were mentioning, I grew up on terrible diet, like grew up in Akron, just processed foods nonstop. And so you pay for that the rest of your life. And then now Mariah, my daughter, she's having a much different experience. And so she can already handle foods that me and my wife really can't handle. And it's because her experience is markedly different than ours. And we're being very concerted about that, and just restricting sugars, and just making sure she's eating consistent prebiotic foods and a lot of variety. And so, I think that if you're a parent, that's the best thing you could do for your kid. It's not that they need allergy shots. It's not that they need all this medication. They need exposure to good, healthy sourced things that will help their body respond accordingly.
Well, that, and, we used to play in the dirt.
Yeah.
When we were younger, you're on a farm, you're in the dirt all
Right.
the time. You're being exposed. Your immune system is being challenged on a small level. So it's becoming stronger,
Yeah.
just like we train our muscles on a small level to become stronger.
Yeah.
Nowadays, kids don't get that.
Yeah.
The difference between my son and daughter is amazing. Don't yell at me, Zoe. I mean, my son was raised with a diet very much like you're raising your daughter.
Yeah.
My daughter was raised with a different diet,
Yeah.
and it broke my heart. And, and she's aware and now trying to make changes.
That's
Right.
awesome.
And that's good. But once
Yeah.
again, the human body's so resilient, but with the proliferation of chemicals in our food and our atmosphere, combined with, this is a whole nother argument, the EMFs we're exposed to.
Right.
Wow. I mean, the challenges kids have nowadays are
Well, I agree.
amazing.
And I again am very impassioned about this topic because I feel like, I think that in the end, there are a lot of things that can threaten us, and a lot of things that can, get us to the state we're in, with increased autism rates and increased cancers and increased craziness of allergies and exposure to things. But I feel like the easiest thing that you can manipulate and the biggest bang for your buck is diet, period. And then, it's like one of those things where I feel like I often make the comment that sport is going to look different even moving forward in the future. I feel like we know this with running, because guys in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they can handle ridiculous volumes. And because of the conversation earlier we had about some of these pesticides manipulating the orientation of collagen, were less stable. One of the things that we know by this happening is the increased rates of joint repairs. Collagen is part of cartilage. Cartilage breaks down quicker with poor collagen. Next thing you know, you're getting increased rates of, hip replacements, knee replacements, blah, blah, blah. Why did that go up? And I think right now, the average runner in high school and the average runner professionally can't handle the same volume that runners did in the 70s and 80s. They can't handle the same volume of runners that people can handle in East Africa, where they're more closely connected to their farms. And I think it's genuinely, the sport of football, the sport of baseball, all these sports are going to have to change. And we're taking trauma out of these sports because people are just not as strong and stable as they used to be. And I think 20 years from now, what we think of as football today will still look even markedly different, because the kids that are growing up in this environment, they are not going to be able to handle those hits. They're just not as stable. I mean, I heard this story a while back. There were this one family were talking about how, like, one of their kids was playing hockey and he fractured his femur. Like, high school kid fractured his femur in hockey. Like, he got checked under the board and he fractured his femur. Like, that is really crazy to me.
I mean, the argument
That
you're
is so
making
nuts.
is almost like with the advanced training techniques, it's almost like the body is not going to be able to handle itself.
Yeah.
It's-
Especially with the growth.
Right. The engine's going to be more
the main
robust than the chassis.
right.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
I mean, you're putting a V8 in a Honda Civic, man.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like the
constantly
skeletal system isn't going to be able, and ligaments aren't going to be able to keep up with the muscular.
1000%
Sure.
agree.
And then when that hit happens, you get 200-300 pound guys going after each
Yes.
other, or you get a skinny runner that's trying to put in the mileage.
Yes.
The skeletal structure just can't put up with it.
And
And the only real weapon we have against that is food.
right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Is absolutely, it's the building blocks of all of us.
And talk about enjoyment. You make these changes. A simple meal is now a banquet.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Man, this is a
We touched
good
on some
one.
good topics. We're already past an hour here, so I feel like I think we're gonna have to have you on the show another time.
I can ramble on.
No, this is
No, this is
great,
perfect.
man.
This is awesome.
This is
Jared,
great.
any final points from our actual farmer? Right.
Well, I was just gonna kind of run past you the idea of like supports like, and we were talking healthy collagen, bones, bone broth.
Yeah.
Consuming a high amount of bone broth, I mean, that's going to support your
Right.
musculoskeletal system.
Exactly.
But-
That's why people are taking collagen now, because they are understanding that is the raw fodder for this.
And a
it
plug
offsets-
for T Hill Farm.
Yeah.
You can get chicken feet and make your own bone broth.
Yeah.
And that is like the highest source of collagen
it is.
in that animal. And it makes the most amazing, nutritious bone broth.
It is, because a chicken is mostly cartilage,
Yep.
and that's cartilage has a higher proportion
And
of
it's
collagen
and it's
versus
in-
bone.
And it's
That's
in
why.
that foot.
Did
Yeah.
not know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So that's why chicken collagen is different, because it's
Yep.
a cow is sturdy, a cow is bone, right? A chicken, you could take its leg and bend it, and
No,
it's
chicken
like
legs.
it's like collagen. It's like a kid, 3-year-old falls down the stairs, they literally bounce. They're mostly cartilage.
And you bring up the issue of the quality of the chicken. One of the cooking demos I used to do was to buy a chicken from a grocery store, put it in a pot with the chicken from a local farm, and just
Yeah.
boil it in this cooking demo and have people look at the difference. The
Wow.
chicken from the grocery store has brown foam. The
Mm.
chicken from the farm, it has a little bit of foam, but it mostly has a yellow fat, a colorful broth of that chicken color that
Yeah.
you expect. You don't expect that.
Meh.
Yeah, it looks,
Yeah.
it's like what's-
interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's
Just meh.
yeah, exactly. It's
Brown.
like here's your dinner.
Enjoy.
Oh my gosh.
But that helps to give people who need convincing
Yeah.
a visual,
Yes.
because we are very visual creatures.
Well, okay, so you're like, man, that's kind of sucks. You're like kind of doom and gloom conversation we had here. I mean, I think like,
This is positive
as
in my-
we're, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. It's overall positive, and it should be a call to action. However, I would say other things that we can do, just as we're kind of finishing up the show here, that's what I was saying earlier about having collagen and taking collagen. That's one way to push out some of the bad collagen you're making from some of these pesticides. So taking collagen supplement is smart. The other thing to do is take glycine, which if you just go to Amazon, just get glycine, just glycine pill or glycine powder. And then, as I said before, glycine and glyphosate, or the bad pesticide, which that's what that's known as, they vie for the same receptor. So if you take glycine and just take a spoonful of it, it's slightly sweet, that will kick out 50%, because they're going to vie for the same receptor. That's going to kick out 50% of the bad pesticide, and then you'll repair your body more naturally with that. So that's one of the ways to offset it. It's obviously not optimal. The best thing to do is just avoid it altogether, and eat organic and eat well sourced, as we're all saying. But that's also kind of a quick and dirty thing you can do to protect your gut as well. You'll find that your gut will actually improve. So if you're a runner or you're an athlete, and you have to take constant bathroom breaks during races, or you get the runs or whatever, multiple times a week or a month or whatever, however you're doing with your gut, this is one way to stabilize it, because as I mentioned before, a lot of these things are actually antibiotics, and you can sort of push that through your small intestine and large intestine, and it'll actually kind of calm down your gut. So just take that of note.
On
Yeah.
Amazon, you can go to bulk supplements.
Yeah.
It is $20 for 167 servings.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cheap. Glycine is pretty cheap. So it's
Yeah.
one of the 20 amino acids.
So basically, prevention is much more affordable than
Yeah, well,
your
that's
cure.
100%, 100%. And if you took glycine instead, instead of like a lot of the probiotics or a lot of supplements, I mean, it's gonna be better for you long term because you're getting to the source of what's actually breaking you down. So, all right, I think we're good for the show. We'll have to have you on another time, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. This was an absolute pleasure. This was, better than I expected, actually,
Wealth
to be
of
honest with you. I think that's one of my more exciting and fun shows,
Yeah,
and
this was
informative
fun.
shows.
This was a lot of fun.
So please, if you're listening to this and you know somebody that has gut issues, somebody that wants to take a hold of their diet, that has allergies, that just isn't feeling great, is always getting injured, just clunky, just life is clunky for them, please listen to this episode, share it with them. We'd love that. I mean, I think this is just valuable information. Any final points, everybody? Anything you want to last?
I think the biggest point is now you know where to look if you're wondering where to look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna
Start
say.
with the farmers markets and just take baby steps.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it doesn't have to be totally revamping things. All right. And here we go. Until another week.
Sweet.
Thank you, guys. Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail, Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury-free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster Without Fail. Appreciate it. Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries.